Following on from my recent video where I described what had happened to the lay shaft assembly of the Velocette gearbox that I've been working on, which we'll have a look at in a moment, I found that the pressed on gear that presses onto the splines, the innermost gear, was had crept along the shaft, and the lay shaft had actually, the end of the lay shaft had got closer to the kickstart end or side of the gearbox. And I pressed the gear back on fully home and then started to take a look at the kickstart mechanism assembly, and I've also had a look online. There was a place I picked up on the internet called Tanks Spares, I think it was called. He deals in Velocette spares, and he's got excellent sort of pictures and diagrams of the parts and so on. And first of all, there's this one. This is the housing, obviously, for the kickstart mechanism, and it would appear from what I've seen and be able to work out that at some time someone's machined this out and bushed it, and we've got a bronze bush in there with an O-ring in it to stop any oil leaking out, I suppose. But normally, by the looks of what I've seen, that bush wouldn't be there and it'd be plain sort of cast iron down to this diameter. On the inside, we've got that sort of raised shoulder there. I'm going to try and sort of describe how this lot goes together and works if I can. Basically, that face there will trap 3 floating pins that I'll come to in a minute, but also this spring goes in there to sort of preload the kickstart quadrant or shaft itself, to sort of force it towards the gearbox and the end of the lay shaft. And I'm going to try and fit this in here now, and we'll drop those 3 pins out. I'll come to them in a minute, but basically this fits in this housing like this, and you can see the spring tries to push it out, and that obviously pushes it towards the corresponding toothed face on the end lay shaft gear. And when you press the kickstart, this obviously turns the shaft and then the engine to start it. This is the kickstart shaft return spring, obviously. And when you've got the kickstart fitted, you've got this sort of face cam arrangement here. What happens is the kickstart pedal has got this sort of extra notch on it, if you like. And as the return spring pulls the kickstart up back to its resting place, that ramp or cam, if you like, pulls, as the kickstart returns upwards, it pulls this lot in against the spring that pushes it out to meet the other gear in the gearbox. So it's very complex, but obviously it works. Now on top of that, we've got inside this one, we've got this floating bush. Now this is a sliding fit both into the kickstart quadrant and over the end of the lay shaft, so that just sort of floats and locates the end of the lay shaft and stops that waggling about. Now, because this gear moves in and out as it operates, obviously when it's moved out, this floating bush would come with it normally, but what you've got behind it, if we get it out, there's this thick hard steel disc, and what happens is that goes in there, followed by the bush, and then on this side there's 3 little pins which go in there. There's 6 holes, but only 3 of them used for the pins, there and there. So they go in at 120 degree spacings, and what happens is when these meet that face, they keep this bush in a steady and constant position even when the kickstart quadrant or the faced gear moves in and out to engage and disengage with the corresponding face on the lay shaft. So that bush stays in a constant position up against the end of, well, the end of the lay shaft goes in it, and obviously there's a face that runs against it. There's a thrust washer as well, so that would keep the lay shaft under control and in position and steady. What the problem was with the gearbox I was working on, it turned out, was that those 3 pins were all missing, every single one of them. So this bush was able to sort of just slide back, if you like, rather than stay put, and that in turn allowed both the kickstart mechanism to possibly creep a little bit towards the lay shaft, although we got that face cam arrangement that would hopefully have that under control. But what couldn't be stopped from happening was that gear on the end of the lay shaft, on the furthest end of the lay shaft, had crept off the splines that it was pressed onto by about 2 or 3 millimeters, moving the corresponding gear that works with this one towards it, and it was making contact even when it shouldn't have done. And that was all down to these 3 little pins being missing. Now, would you believe, I had a rummage through some stuff I've got laying around, and I knew there was a few odd Velocette bits, and I had a look in the boxes, and I actually found these 3 items. 2 of them would have been correct. One of them was a little bit too short and a little bit too fat. I only needed 3, so 2 out of 3 ain't bad, the song says. But what I decided to do, I needed to get another one, so I ordered, let's see if I've got one here. Here we are. All I could get was a few of these, and I had to buy a minimum order. Not many, and it didn't cost the earth, but they were the right diameter but too long. So I spun them in the lathe and held the linisher disc of the grinder against them and shortened 3 of them, and that's what I've got in there. So I've got 3 new pins in there of the 9/16 length by 3/16 of an inch diameter. So they're all good, and they're what I've got in there now. So I'm ready to put this lot together and hopefully come out with a working kickstart assembly that doesn't bind and doesn't sort of make a racket and force the kickstart to come downwards when the bike's being ridden. And we'll just go over here and I'll just show you the corresponding face that that mechanism engages with, and there it is. There you can see there's the toothed gear. Hopefully you can see the end of the lay shaft, which I'll just get that bush actually. Hopefully, bear with me a sec. I'll try and get it out. There we are. That also fits on there, you see. Spins and floats on that shaft as it does inside the kickstart quadrant. But because we were missing those pins, we had nothing to control this bush, and it was able to creep this way 2 or 3 millimeters, which correspondingly allowed the lay shaft and the gear that's pressed on the end of it to displace themselves a bit as well. So I should be able to put it all back together knowing that lot's going to be kept under control. But in order to do that, I think my next mission is to have great fun with all these springs and bits, and I might have to probably use a few choice words as I put this lot together, but that's what I'm going to do next. And then hopefully I'll have a complete and operational Velocette gearbox and working kickstart mechanism that doesn't bind with its corresponding lay shaft gear, I hope.